Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Surf's People in Place Practice Network. I'm Unique. I'm the Chief Executive of Surf. I'm here today with my colleague Emma Scott running this, and our colleague Derek Rankin is also present in the audience today as well. Thanks very much for joining us. It's a cold, miserable, wet day in Edinburgh. I don't know how it is where you are. It might be nicer in the west. I believe it's our colleague in Peterhead says it was a bright sunny day in Peterhead this morning. So some of you may be enjoying better weather than where I am. My house is drafty. The temperature's below 17 degrees in my house, and I'm still not putting the heating on. I've got two jumpers on. I'm trying to hold out till October. And that segues nicely into our topic for today. As you'll probably be aware, that we try and look at the operation of public policy, how it works actually in practice, particularly at a community level. And the retrofit agenda is obviously something that is high on Scottish Government policy. It's permanently discussed for the past few years as to how we deliver improved insulated homes. And I suppose one area where there is a huge amount of work to do that is in our existing social housing stock. And where you're looking at doing retrofit at scale, then obviously there are challenges that come with that. And we thought it would be useful to have a session this morning looking at one particular project or retrofit project within Edinburgh. And joining us today, we have Carl Baker from Collective Architects, who have long experience in doing retrofit, and I think an award-winning project at the Woodside Multis in Glasgow, where a lot of knowledge was gained in retrofitting post-war tower blocks. And again, in Edinburgh, they're working on some more post-war buildings which have quite a reputation, well-known listed buildings, and well-known to the public probably across Edinburgh, possibly internationally because of them featuring in books and films at times. And we thought it was an opportunity for Carl to share some of their approaches around the working with the tenants and the tenants' kind of perspective and how you manage tenants' expectations, and the whole process that is involved in doing a retrofit project where you're working with a local authority as a client, but obviously the main beneficiary of the work that you're doing are tenants. So Carl has kindly agreed to share his experience with us this morning. And I suppose one of the reasons that we invited Carl to do this was because Carl got in touch with us, I think, on the back of us doing some presentations on the place standard last year. And Collective Architects have used the place standard both for wider projects, but they've adapted it more nichely for some of their specific projects that they're working on. And I thought it would be interesting to see how they've not just used the place standard as it exists, but actually adapted it for more bespoke projects. And I thought that would be helpful for us to kind of share today. So that's enough from me. We've only got one presentation this morning. So we'll be finishing by 11 today. So you've maybe got an hour back that you maybe weren't expecting. But it's the usual format where there'll be a presentation from Carl and then a Q&A from me and from anybody else in the room. So keep your questions. We can use the chat, but there's a smaller group of us this morning, so feel free to unveil yourself and ask Carl any questions that you have at the end. And so, Carl, I'd like to hand over to you if you want to start sharing your screen.
Thanks, Ewan. Is that coming through for everyone?
That's working for me.
Fab. Thanks very much. So I am an architect, pacifier designer, and employee elected trustee at Collective Architecture. And today I'm going to share with you our experience of working on the retrofit of Cable's Wynd House and Linksview House. And for me personally, and for Collective, this project is really about putting people at the heart of retrofit. And rather than focus on the buildings and our architectural proposals, I'm really going to share our process for how we're trying to do this, which may be a relief for some of you, depending on your predilection for brutalist socialist architecture. And for those just briefly who don't know, we're an employee-owned architectural practice with studios in Glasgow, Edinburgh, and Dundee. We're a registered cooperative, and we're quite unique in that we've been formally operating like this for 17 years. And I think our structure and commitment to collaboration and collective decision-making really is reflected in how we work internally and also our engagement with clients, stakeholders, and communities. And we've got a focus on participation and sustainability, which I think hopefully will come across in our approach on this project. Cables Windhouse and Linksview House are two Category A-listed brutalist tower blocks, and they're situated in the heart of Leith's conservation area, and they look absolutely majestic in sunshine on Leith with a foreboding sky background. They were built between 1963 and 67, and the original architects were Allison, Hutchison and Partners. Cables Windhouse has 112 homes in it, and most of these are two-bed, four-person apartments with some other one-bed, two-person apartments. And colloquially, they're known as the banana flats, and that's kind of due to their plan form, which wraps around an adjacent tenement block. And Linksview House is a much kind of smaller linear block with 98 homes, and that sits as the termination of the Kirk Gate, which really is kind of that extension of Leith Walk. So kind of a really prominent building in the city centre. And both of these have quite distinct architectural styles and elevations, comprising of private recessed balconies and external access galleries at every third level on the opposite elevations, which provide access up into a flat, down into a flat, or through into a flat. So there's not stopping at every single level for the lifts. The buildings are really highly repetitive, but also surprisingly varied, with many unique elements and junctions, and also several moments of joy. But they have suffered from an extended period of decline, poor stewardship, and are in major need of upgrading and modernisation to provide warm homes, which are safe, comfortable, and dry. And this really is a fundamental human right. And in Scotland, the energy efficiency standard for social housing, EISH, which is now upgraded to EISH 2, aims to address this, and it looks to improve energy efficiency of social housing in Scotland with the goal of reducing energy consumption, fuel poverty, which is quite critical, and I'll kind of come back to this in a little bit later, and the emissions of greenhouse gases. And it's EISH 2 which has been the driver or impetus for this particular project for the client. And really, this is about ensuring that social housing meets EPC Band B within the limits of cost, technologies, and necessary constraints. But the brief for the project really is much more nuanced and multi-layered, and it's kind of, for us, we've tried to summarize it into 4 themes: energy, comfort, health and safety, and placemaking. And really, these all need to work together. We can't kind of just look at these individually, because the whole really is greater than the sum of the parts if we get all of this right. And in this particular project, because of the listing status, we do and really are trying to balance energy, architecture, and conservation. But energy, I kind of like to kind of move away from that a little bit and really talk about comfort, because comfort is the effect on people from improving energy efficiency if you do it properly. And we're trying to get to this sweet spot in the middle where we're really getting that balance of all 3 of these elements. And speaking of people, to do this, we need a big team. We've got obviously the client team, and within the City of Edinburgh Council, there's a bunch of people that are working on this project. And we've also got our consultant team, which keeps on expanding as we uncover things that need to be dealt with and we need assistance with. But really, for us, residents and stakeholders are that kind of missing link in this group of people, and particularly the residents themselves who live in the building and who call the building home. So for us, this often starts with speaking to people, and that's kind of a key part of our process. And we need to build trust with a very diverse, motivated, and informed group of people who live in the building. Some of you may have seen in the news, local news recently, that they've made deputations to the council to discuss the state of their lifts and improving those. So they really are an active group of people who care about the building in which they live. And the only way to do this really is to be present, ask the right questions, and listen properly, so that people feel heard. And true to Leith, we've really had to persevere. This requires us to use the right tools to enable and empower people to consider, evaluate, and discuss the built environment. And more often than not, for us, this starts with the place standard tool before we've even put pen to paper. And we do this really so that we can understand the priorities, concerns, and frustrations of the community about their local area. And this then helps us to inform the project brief and understand what each project can do in addition to meeting the client's main objectives. But we know the place standard really can be quite unwieldy and even daunting for people to be presented with when they come into an engagement session. But what it is good at is disarming people who maybe come in with a specific agenda or quite frustrated. It's good at breaking down barriers, and it's a really good tool for focusing discussion on trying to identify positive change. So we've persevered, and over many years and events, we've adapted and tweaked the layout and format of the Place Standard tool to really try and find that sweet spot between a daunting 20-page document and a condensed single sheet, which still allows for quantitative and qualitative assessment, because it's this combination which I feel, and as a practice, we feel that makes the Place Standard such a useful tool. But what's critical in this process is that we also need to really read every single response, understand and honestly kind of quantify those qualitative responses too. So what we've settled on is a document which captures these critical elements of the Place Standard and turns it into an A3 document, which condenses it into quite a neat format, which can be folded up and kind of handed to people as they come in, or you can even do letter drops with it. And we've started to add QR codes to allow people to engage with this online through our own specific platforms. So we've taken this format and we've developed what we've called quite easily the home standard tool to really enable people to talk about buildings and the homes in which they live in and look at that at a much smaller scale. So very, very similar to the Place Standard. There's 14 themes, which some of them have translated over quite well, and there's others which we've added back in to really pick out the key elements, particularly around retrofit and understanding the lived experience of people's homes. So this varies from warmth and heating your home through to care and repair, flexibility, and those other elements there. It allows us to capture the makeup of individual homes. This has been quite critical in understanding overcrowding in the building to try and advocate for other change within the project. We get the quantitative assessment, which we could compare across buildings. And we also get the qualitative answers as well, which really kind of give you that true understanding of people's experience of the buildings. But again, we need to quantify these qualitative elements to pick out those key themes and elements which are of greatest concern or most importance to people within each building. And as well as understanding people's lived experience in retrofit and trying to get the best results for people, we really have to understand the existing buildings. This starts with detailed surveys, and we work a lot in 3D, looking at archive information, and particularly how the building was put together, because really very early on, we need to understand what is the structure of this building and what are how is it being put together so that we know what we can start to improve. And to do this, we then take those historical drawings, interpret those, and recreate these in 3D to understand how that building's been put together. We also need to understand how it's performing thermally. So we've carried out a number of tests from thermal imaging to airtightness. And we can then start to layer all of this information into our baseline energy models of the existing buildings and also start to test proposals. But what this spits out is a bunch of information which really kind of, for a lot of people, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But what we can do is we can start to then drive our kind of approach and look at, well, what does that mean to people? And start to look at not kilowatts per hour, but costs per year for people. And this also allows us to look at metrics and standards that we're trying to meet. So for the project, EISH or EISH2 is the driver. This is really governed by trying to achieve an EPC band and looking at CO2 emissions. But what it does is it chooses to neglect a bunch of criteria which really impact on the lived experience and people's comfort. So space heating, hot water demand, air tightness, overheating, and thermal bridging. All of these really do contribute to, the performance of the building, which is what we're trying to improve, and not just look at hitting that target. So there are other standards such as ACB, LETI, and ENERFIT, which cover each of these and have a way of measuring it and also criteria to achieve across all of these other categories, which are ignored by EIS. And the common denominator for all of these really is the passive house planning package. And we really kind of advocate for using this as a tool when it comes to understanding energy and energy modeling. And you don't have to seek certification to follow this methodology. We also look at using the LETI retrofit process, which is about testing, iterating, and refining throughout the design stages, so that when we get to completion and handover, we can be really sure that the building that we're delivering meets the client's expectations and performs as it's meant to on paper. And this is really about just, minding the performance gap and trying to eliminate that altogether. And we're doing this really so that we move away from this temperature and heating fluctuation, which we're also used to, as Ewan's mentioned about his cold, drafty flat, is that typically the temperature drops, the heating goes on, it's got a high load, it goes off, the temperature drops, it goes back on again. And what you end up with is an environment which isn't comfortable. People are, you're hot, you're cold, you're hot, you're cold. And what we want to get to is an environment where the temperature is much more consistent and the energy required to deliver that is much more minimal. And we're also looking to remove the risk of any unintended consequences. If retrofit is done without consideration, we all know the impact that can actually have, and we can end up with the building performing just like it has before we've even made any interventions. And we also need to consider resident behavior as well. The number of properties that we've been in at the start of a retrofit where people have blocked up and taped up trickle vents, for example, understandably so, because they've got cold air coming in that they think if they stop it's going to improve. But what that leads to is all those risks of condensation, damp, and mold. So as well as thermal improvements, we also need to be really considerate of ventilation and really trying to get the right ventilation approach for people living in the buildings. And to do this, we need to look at our workflow and move away from a typical workflow, which puts a lot of the energy and concentration of the design team at the later design stages, and shift that so that we're really front loading all of this information gathering and early stage design work. So that whilst we're looking at concept proposals and spatial arrangements, we're also looking at where we can get the quick wins in energy improvement, such as looking at form factor, which on Cables Wind House and Linksview House has been one of the biggest and easiest things that we can do to really reduce energy demand within the building. We need to think about how the buildings are put together and start thinking about where is this air tightness line, what materials are meeting it, and how do we reduce thermal bridges. At REBA stage 2, really, we need to be doing this well before we're into technical design stage. And coming back to ventilation, I think a lot of people on the call may or may not be familiar with mechanical ventilation with heat recovery, or MVHR, which is a kind of key proponent of the passive house approach. But this really is the best ventilation strategy that you could put in a building in a retrofit. But we know the big issues with this are access for maintenance. So on all of our projects, we're really trying to find an approach where we can locate these units in communal landlord areas so that maintenance doesn't become the blocking factor to providing the best ventilation. And all of this really leads into a methodology and an approach and process where we can look at the baseline, how is the building performing currently, and then how do these options all compare to deliver the best results. And we can then go back to those standards and metrics that I was talking about and see where we sit within those. And really, it's kind of, for us, it's about trying to give the clients enough information to justify maybe going that little bit further. And this metric here for us really is the critical one, and ensuring that anything that we're proposing and delivering doesn't put people at risk of fuel poverty. So to do this, we also need to ensure that we're keeping the residents updated on the proposals. listening to their feedback and repeating this process through the design stages and trying to bring them on this journey. Because really it's about improving the lives of those who call either building home by considerately but drastically improving performance of the building while still diligently conserving two category A-list buildings in the heart of a conservation area. And at the same time, we also need to remember to find the joy, which on this project has really been explored through colour and our collaboration with Fiona McLaughlin from the University of Edinburgh. Fiona's approach to the project has been really unique, and it's kind of opened our eyes to how kind of colour might be used in buildings. And Fiona's process was about looking at an observed colour palette and looking at colour in the context and in the buildings themselves, and then driving that down into a palette which kind of suits a 1960s style building, and looking at references such as Bernard Klein, and particular interest in his approach to using painting as a methodology to unlock colour and how colour might be applied to a building and create provocations as well to kind of say what if, and then test these methods and create tools which allow for not just the design team but also the residents to kind of get involved in this process, because as much as there's an architectural design element to this, really, we want to deliver something which residents are proud to live in, and we've been able to kind of bring residents on this journey through workshops around colour and test these things in 2D and 3D. And from our experience on other tower block retrofits and lessons learned from other contractors and architects who are also delivering projects at a similar scale and significance, the success really will be how well tenants are engaged with, and how a thorough understanding of their requirements are reflected not just in the proposals, but in the quality of the realised project as well, and ensuring that it does deliver the transformational change that we're all aiming for. And just on a personal note, I guess for people who are responsible for commissioning projects and setting budgets, I really do understand the difficulties on even a tiny scale of how difficult it is to try and ensure that you've got enough money to do the things well and to do them properly. Thank you. And
Thank you very much, Carl. So those final pictures, for those that didn't realise that's Carl's flat where he's got his own project ongoing. So thanks, that was really interesting, Carl. I suppose it would be interesting for you to talk a bit more about your actual experience of working with the tenants using the place standard and the home standard, and what sort of differences you maybe discovered in between the two, particularly the home standard one, which is the one that you developed yourself.
Yeah, so I think we do love the place standard. I know it's got its flaws, but I think it really does. For us, it breaks down such a difficult topic into bite-sized chunks that people can kind of, I think, work with and talk to us about. The challenge on these types of projects really is apathy and trying to get residents engaged in the process. I think because in so many social housing settings, people are promised change, and kind of it quite often doesn't materialize and isn't delivered. So the big challenge for us was really about trying to get residents to speak to us, and at that early stage, and not when we come out with proposals, but really for us, it was a tool that we could then use to speak to the client and say, we know the project brief is this, but these are the key things which people have spoken to us about, and here's the data that backs that up. And to try and kind of maximize engagement, we posted a home standard tool through everyone's letterbox with a QR code on it so that people can fill it out in paper and hand it into the concierge, and we collected them when we typed them all up, or people could just do it on their smartphone really quickly through Mentimeter. But and there's also still work for us to do on it as well. It's maybe not quite right yet. It could still be developed, but I think it's feedback was that I think people appreciated being listened to was the key thing.
And I suppose one of the things that in my experience in observing the results of the play use of the place standard is that the um, element that is consistently low wherever it's used is people's sense of control. And I wondered if your use of it, if that was also similarly low in the projects where you've used it, or if there was a difference.
No, I think you're right. I think that that is a common theme. I think hopefully for us, what we're going to do is when the retrofit finishes, is we'll go back out and we'll use the home standard tool as a post occupancy evaluation methodology as well. And I'm hoping that through this, there will be a uptick in influence and sense of control. And hopefully we'll be able to demonstrate that by speaking to people at the start, no matter who's doing it on what project, there is a benefit to it, and you kind of can hopefully positively change that aspect. But that very much was on both buildings, and we've also used it on Craig Miller and Peffer Mill. It, influence and sense of control really is low on people's experience.
I mean, I mean, I would say it's interesting, even in even in well-heeled communities that I've seen it being used in, people there also feel they don't have a lot of control over their environment either. You mentioned sort of the sort of performance gap issue, and I suppose that continue monitoring as you're working through a project. But what is there learning that you've looking back to cite the wood? Did you work on the Woodside
I
bit?
personally
You
didn't.
didn't.
I do know a lot about it because we've spoken to the client and taken people to get lessons learned sessions. So I am quite familiar with it, but I personally wasn't involved.
But but what sort of lessons have you learned from that as a sort of practice that has maybe altered the way you look at the current projects on the ground?
Um, the big one was the ventilation, and so Woodside does have MVHR in it. They are in people's flats, and one of the big takeaways from that was get them outside of the private spaces and get them into the communal ones, because that is the biggest barrier from most clients, I think, and housing providers on MVHR is maintenance. So that was one of the big ones. Um, there's been a lot of it comes down to procurement and other elements, but I think the feedback really has been really positive, quite fortunately, on Woodside, and people's experience of that. So it's yeah, kind of a lot of the lessons learned are kind of try and just keep doing what you're doing, but do it a little bit better, I think is the approach. But the key thing is the energy modeling, because through value engineering, there was a big value engineering exercise on Woodside. I can't remember the figures, but it took, I think it took a year or so to actually procure the project because of just how expensive it was initially, and then drilling it down. But what we were able to do was use the energy modeling to kind of say, okay, you can take this out. If you do that, it's going to have this consequence and this impact. So if you do change the ventilation strategy, it won't just change the quality of the air and reduce damp and mold. It's actually going to change energy bills by X amount. So we're able to do that as well through that process of trying to beat the performance gap through a detailed energy model.
Okay, interesting. I mean, it's the issue of it maintaining the MVHR. I mean, I know even on the pilot Nidri Road flats, I'm aware that there are issues there with the inaccessibility of doing some maintenance, which is creating a noise, which is annoying for other neighbours, but one tenant won't let people in. And so it's an interesting sort of aspect of how we actually manage what are new technologies for a lot of us, and new ways of heating our homes and understanding the maintenance of that. I mean, the Woodside multis were also kind of in some ways sort of flagship things for retrofit because it was people were remained in situ, and obviously the history of decant is not positive, and the impacts it has on people's lives, even short term kind of decant. I want, and I know that, but I know that that's also complicated to do retrofit with people in situ. So how are you and the council looking at that with the projects that you're working at in Edinburgh?
Mm-hmm. So I would say Edinburgh and the client team within the council there are really pushing for minimal disruption to residents. They understand that decanting people just isn't a good option. There's also we can't do it really. There's not the houses in Edinburgh. There's a housing crisis. So we've had to really look at the proposals, look at the strategies and the phasing to work to essentially try and do very similar, so that because of asbestos in the building, there will be some form of decant, particularly where it is the building is riddled with asbestos. So you can't really work on it with people in those areas, but we're able to look at the number of void flats that we've got across both buildings, because we've got some void flats for survey work, and as void flats become available, the council might look to just hold a few of them back so that there's enough void flats between the two buildings, so that as the contractor works through small phases or sections, people can move within the building or to the adjacent building, stay within the local area, and then as soon as the big work that needs them to move out is done, they can then move back in and kind of and do it that way. So I think phasing and just needs to be really considered, essentially.
And then I suppose you may not be able to answer this, but I suppose what quantity of sort of void flats do you need for that to be possible for the construction process to be done in a timely way?
So we've divided the building up into sections of 15 flats. Obviously, some void flats will be within those work sections, so you might need a little bit more to cover that element because they're kind of peppered throughout both buildings. But it's a lot more manageable than trying to decant either 98 or 212 homes in one go. So kind of 15 is like a nice manageable figure. And it also works with just how services are stacked, because of ventilation gets drawn out at the top, but then drainage comes out at the bottom. So we've had to be very clever about working from a bottom up approach so that you can remove the old ventilation system, put in new drainage stacks, and kind of work through the building kind of in columns, but kind of in 15 flats at a time.
Okay, interesting. I mean, it's there's the logistics of moving people out, but there's a technical aspect of actually how you're dealing with the building.
Yeah.
Anyone else have any questions for Pearl?
Just before anyone does come in, I would say that is actually one of the other lessons learned from Woodside is, funnily enough, the client there did say, just get everybody out. It'd be so much easier from their experience. But the main thing to consider is it's not just people that need to get moved, whether it's a daytime decant with to respite spaces or anything. It's what about their pets? What if someone's got a snake or it's something just really random? But it's those kind of unknown things that until you start speaking to people and understanding each household, kind of how you can move people around.
Yes, now I'm aware of another project where somebody has a collection of birds, and it's a big issue for them. So we've got two questions. I'm going to take Mick first, and then Derek.
Sorry about that. Yes, the first thing is it's great to hear you describe, your approach has been rooted in a human rights approach, and I was interested to see that this issue about the flats had come up in the recent Democracy Matters consultation work through work with Making Rights Real. So there's reference to it in the national report. So I hope that'll give the approach some additional traction moving forward, because it does strike me that it's unusual in the relationship between landlords and tenants. I guess I'd be very interested if it was at all possible to get sight of, or possibly even copies of the templates for the home standard, just to get a sense of, how you've translated the place standard into another more bespoke tool, because I think it does address the some of the challenges with the tool to help make it more valuable in a wider range of areas. So that'd be great. I guess I was also interested in the extent you've described the intent to keep the tenants with you, but I'd like to hear a wee bit more about how that panned out in practice. And for example, were there conflicts, and if so, how were you able to handle those? And I guess a critical element of this relationship is the landlord's opinions. To what extent did the landlord mirror or challenge your attempted ethical relationship with the tenants, and how did that pan out?
Yeah, no, two very good questions. So we're a stone's throw from both buildings, which makes it really fortunate for us. We work in Leith, and I can kind of see both buildings from the windows at the back. So we had our initial consultation section was kind of we kind of typically like to kind of phrase that as kind of tell us about. So that breaking down those just initial perceptions of your people think quite often you're going to come to a consultation and tell them something. What we like to do is hear, what do you think about your area? So we kind of say, tell us about Cables, Wine, Linksby House, which is where the home standard tool really came into its fore, because it was, it really was about us just listening. And then as we moved into the design stages, we held just pop-up events in the main lobby spaces of both buildings. So we did the first one after the home standard tool was about us feeding back the feedback from the home standard tool. So this is what you've told us. And then people who maybe hadn't filled out the home standard could say, I agree with that. Oh yeah, that does reflect that. Or actually my view is this. And then we were then able at the same time to say, and these are the concept proposals for the building. The energy side of it, a lot of people aren't really interested in the detail of that. They just want to know, is it going to get better? Is it going to get warmer? And actually decant and how does it affect me is the big question, which at REBA stages 0 to 2, and we're about to finish REBA stage 3, you can't really answer that because it needs the contractor's input, the construction phase plan, the TLOs, to do that. But we did throughout REBA stages 2 and 3, we've had several events in the lobbies, because that's where you just get most people, is saying, here's the updated proposals. Let's just chat about them. What do you think? And we're putting in community hubs into both buildings at the ground floor, and the placemaking, the landscaping things are the things which people really, I think, kind of latched onto and get excited about, because as long as you say we're going to insulate, make it more airtight, improve ventilation, and explain those things, people are then like, okay, yeah, that sounds good, just when you're doing it. And then from the client side, our commission actually included enhanced consultation. They were really keen that actually we were the main contact for residents, and kind of that body that kind of almost absorbs everything that people are saying and kind of understands it, distills it, and then kind of feeds it back to the client group. So the residents have quarterly forums with the council, other kind of key local stakeholders, and they're kind of hosted by Inspiring Leaf, organisation linked to the Bethany Trust, and we attend those as well. So we kind of, every opportunity we have, we're kind of trying to kind of be involved in things that the residents are hosting or raising their concerns. And because some of us live locally and work locally, we're going to the same shops as these people. So we're meeting them on a daily basis sometimes. And so there's a big onus on us to get it right.
And has there been any actual conflict that you've had to kind of deal with?
So there's not been too much conflict. I think some people didn't like the idea of a community hub at the ground floor of their building. Some people really loved it, but there's been people who have other concerns that aren't related to the energy side of things, which are about noise. These being concrete buildings, noise and heat transfer through them in almost the same way, in that they're just acoustic and thermal bridges. So, and the lifts were conflict as well. So I think people looked at us to kind of say, well, what are you doing about the lifts? What are you doing about acoustics? And although those weren't really part of our brief, what we were able to do was, again, just listen and absorb, but then advocate to the client and say, these are things that are coming up. These are big issues. What can, do you want to do something about it? Here's what you could do. So we managed to convince the client to bring on an acoustician to do acoustic surveys, so that although we would never be able to bring these buildings up to contemporary new build standards, what we can try and do is, with an acoustician, is identify what are the things that we could do which might make an improvement, or where are the key areas to invest to make an improvement. And then the same with the lifts. Obviously, the lifts are a hot topic in Cables Line specifically, and the residents made their own deputation to the whole council. But what we're able to do as a design team is, again, advocate to the client and say, well, we can identify a specialist lift surveyor to come in and give us independent third-party review, so that you've got the experience from the residents, and you've then also got a third-party review, and that allows them to make an informed decision on what they're going to do about the lifts.
Okay.
And then just on the point, Mick, about sharing information, I'd be more than happy to share templates that we developed. With the home standard specifically, we'd really like to invest time in making that an open source tool. because we see the value in that for everybody's retrofit project, really, and kind of there's no point reinventing the wheel on these things.
Could I just ask a quick supplementary? Sorry, it's just on the basis of that tension between the emphasis of the residents, and I think it was maybe the residents group on the lifts issue, if I understand it correctly. So they would have, I think they were identifying that as what they saw as the principal human rights issue. And I just wondered, has that, I mean, the approach you're describing, you know, which is bringing your technical expertise to an options appraisal and adding that into the mix and hopefully advocate for it to be resolved with the landlord, sounds eminently sensible. But have you managed to sort of get a resolution to that? And you know, has there been an agreement? You know, I haven't followed it in the media, although I'm aware there is an issue.
Yeah, so I think the councillors, I think the motion was approved to, I think, to replace the list. From what I understand at the meeting, it was hard to follow it fully. On a client lead side of things, within the project, there's a report sitting with the client and the council, which makes a recommendation, which hasn't been communicated yet to the residents. So I think the residents should hear first the news, but you know, the lifts are in a terrible state and they need something done to them. So watch this space.
It just goes to ultimately, if the tenant leadership take one position, you know, and you are maybe not able to take that position fully, but it sounds as though you backed it and maybe there's a positive resolution. That's great. Thanks for that.
No problem.
It's also interesting that Leith is because I think the other human rights and housing issue was also in Leith, and the other blocks, the two were retrofitted a long time ago, further to the west. So it's interesting that Leith is sort of, the human rights issues around that are remaining a strong Leith issue. Derek, you had a question.
Thank you for the presentation, Carla. I liked your kind of framing of the main priorities about the comfort of the residents rather than the energy efficiency of the building. You actually answered my question there. I saw the kind of place standard survey results pop up, and some people had scribbled acoustic issues between flats and lack of privacy. So I was going to ask about the noise, but you've answered that. So maybe just zooming out, the place standard tool asks a few questions about the wider area. I'm just curious what the kind of main challenge or opportunities that residents saw in that, and whether that was fed back to your contacts in the council as well.
So we tried to do the place standard tool as part of our tell us about phase. It was just too much to do that plus the home standard tool. So we didn't. There's tons of anecdotal information that people spoke to us about the wider area, about you know, pedestrian crossings, bus links, but really we didn't do a full place standard evaluation on this project because it was just too much to do with the group, unfortunately.
I mean, you've been working in Leith because I know because there's the other Kirkgate development as well. So you've been working sort of around that area for quite a long time. So I mean, and because you're based there, you'll be quite familiar with what the issues are. Are there wider landscaping issues around both blocks?
Yeah. So the placemaking side of the project, really, for Cables Wind, it's kind of a whole urban block that we've got, and we're kind of, you know, the place approach is you know, improving links through the site, improving safety and the feeling of safety through lighting and other elements, natural observation, and then we're bringing biodiversity in and trying to just increase the amenity within them. And then Linksview House, it's a much smaller section just at the foot of the building. But then, as you said, the end of the Kirkgate just down from Linksview House at the bottom of the steps in the plinth is one of our other projects that we're looking at. So we're able to kind of tackle placemaking on that wider scale through that project as well.
Sandra Martin has her
hand.
Hi
there. Hi, I'm just really interested in what you were saying there about the sort of public spaces and outside. I work for Living Streets, and I wondered if the council had any sort of plans to take that further and to look at what they had said, what the community had said about how they found the sort of infrastructure around where they live and the crossings and things, because that's something that we would certainly be interested to know more about.
Yeah, so it is interesting because obviously Leith Connections have quite a key project coming down Henderson Street, which kind of is obviously very adjacent to Cables Wynd and Henderson's Gardens Park. And their biggest concern is how do I get my rightly so how do I get my car into my car park? And you know, you're going to be blocking up these routes, which means I'm going to have to go all the way around here. So those are some of the bigger concerns in the local area around the kind of the street and infrastructure. But again, it was because it was just too much to kind of try and talk about all of that, plus the home standard kind of high building element of it. There's not a lot of data to kind of come back to, but I'd say the Leith Connections is quite a contentious thing at the moment in the local area still, after some of the, you know, even though some of the changes have happened for quite a while now, you know, I think it's a hot topic, but parking always is a hot topic in any project, really. Parking and bins are the two things which you end up spending most of your time talking about.
That's great, thank you.
No problem.
We have another real hand, Ellie. Ellie, if you want to ask your question.
Thank you. Yeah, my auto detect isn't working, so I'm a real person, honestly. Yeah, no, thank you. It was a really great presentation. What I wanted to know, I have two questions. One is about kind of the overall project timeline, and do you have like a definitive, are you allowing like slippage in relation to community involvement within your project timeline? And second is, obviously you've done like the home standard tool, place standard tool, but you've also done some creative activities, and I was just wondering what was more popular and what did you get more out of in terms of like creative activities versus that more technical place standard assessment?
Okay. So program wise, I think it's a beast of a project. These buildings are really complex. Woodside took a long time on site, just due to the complexity. So design wise, our program, we're looking to kind of commence REBA stage 4 now in November, and that'll run through with hopefully getting on site late summer, early autumn next year. How long the contract will be on site, I've got no idea. Whether or not the buildings are done concurrently or in a phased manner. But the biggest time slippage risk is access by, you know, allowing people in, because on Woodside the client was explaining that someone might allow the trades in one day, and then they come back the next day and they're like, no, you're not getting in, and that's the biggest program risk, I think. Plus also the unknown unknowns, which we obviously haven't discovered yet. So there's not to completion. There's not a set date yet, but hopefully starting on site by this time next year for that one. And then personally, I think because it was the first time we'd used the home standard tool, because we developed it for this project, I really enjoyed that process, and it was also our first opportunity to meet the residents. I've got a personal task of trying to get as many people's first names and remember them as possible, so that when we do meet them in Lidl or Tesco, we can say hi, and they know that we know them. But the colour workshop was also really, really valuable. What Fiona brought to the project has been phenomenal. And that it wasn't well attended. We flyered every home. We had posters in every lift and every lift lobby. We invited people to come and register to come. But we only maybe had 8 people out of hundreds attend, and that's, you know, people are busy and they've got stuff going on, I get that, but the ones that did turn up really did feed into the proposals, and were able to influence the colour strategy and kind of some of the things that we were looking at with Fiona. And obviously being an architect and being a creative person, kind of that process of we went through a process of abstract painting, taking Fiona's approach, working through in detail to essentially those collage kits that we developed. And kind of each of those exercises was just really lovely, and we've been able to use those, and we've repeated them in the studio as well with our colleagues, just as a fun thing to do on a Friday. And someone said they had a headache at the start of it, and at the end of it they didn't. And whether or not it was art therapy, I don't know, but they got something out of it too.
Thanks very much. I suppose on what's been the response to the introduction of colour to the balconies? I mean, I can see from some of the photographs that people have already introduced it themselves, but what in general?
People are really positive about it. Obviously there's Park Hill in Sheffield, which a lot of people may or may not be familiar with, but Brutalist Cat, grade 2-star listed down in England in Sheffield, which has been completed over a couple of phases, which has introduced colour in different ways. And then there's also Corb's Unity in Marseille, which had colour in it originally. So we were able to show people these projects as precedents. And I think once people kind of saw how the colour had been applied there, they were actually really excited about that idea, because I think one of the things is that we're trying to address is the perception of the buildings from the external. I mean, I obviously had perceptions before I started on the project because I'd never been in them or spoke to people who lived there. And we're kind of looking to try and use it as an opportunity to kind of signify change and investment and regeneration, essentially, and people kind of are buying into that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Historic Scotland are doing a sort of evaluation of their designation process, and actually I found myself talking about our attitudes towards post-war buildings, and I think there are sort of a couple of things that sort of specialists see design qualities that they really like in them and so admire them, but for a lot of but around the banana flats in particular, there's been sort of quite a lot of stigma. When it was announced they were listed, there was some really negative stuff in the press from opinion journalists as well as just general online chat. But I mean, and I find it quite complicated because I admire them in a design sense, but I also know for people who've lived for a long time in post-war buildings, they've had really bad experiences. So their sense of place, their attachment is filtered through poor maintenance, as you kind of talked about at the beginning of this. And so I understand why people have perceptions of it. So things that can sort of change that perception while retaining the same tenancy is kind of really, really important. Was there any desire from the tenants to have the control over the colour, given my references to the sense of control, which I know is not what an architect wants on a large scheme, but was there any requests for that?
It's difficult to say, and this comes down to the fact that I'd say through each event we get more and more people coming along to them, and we speak to more people, but I'd say the majority of people haven't engaged with the process. So it will be interesting to see if there is much pushback from what we're proposing across the whole building. What we are trying to do though is, I think those elevations are really significant, and I don't think it could be a free-for-all pick your own color. It does need that curation whilst trying to have individuality, and our approach, there is a bit of flexibility in it, so that but what we don't want to do is unlock that Pandora's box of saying, well, you can pick that you can't pick, and how do you control that? But we are trying to bring tenant choice into other elements. We've kind of got a lovely palette internally where hopefully residents could pick their front door color, because we are aware that we are proposing something, but we also do want to try and allow for some for bringing choice and control back into it as well. But yeah, we did consider just letting what would happen if you did let people pick, but the elevations are so significant, and it's critical to get it right, I think, on this one.
Yes, I understand. I could make an argument for both sides, both are legitimate. Can I ask, nobody else has put their hand up, if anyone else has any questions, put your hand up. I have a sort of slightly techie question around the agendas that are driving this, because it's EIS 2 is looking at EPC band 3, band B as a target, but what your slides suggested and our discussion is suggesting is that's somewhat blunt, and previously I've done work around the EPCs, and I find them unsatisfactory as a means of measuring actually what's going to happen, or how actually anything operates. I'm in a band F flat, but it doesn't operate as even with my poor insulation and drafty windows, it does not operate like what it's predicted to do. It's not nearly as bad as that. How do you see, you've obviously got a client that's accepting that you're looking at different methodologies as to how you get your results. If a client doesn't want that and they just say, get me EPC band B as quickly as possible and as cheaply as possible, what's your response to kind of that?
I think that's where we'd probably still look to try and do our own energy modeling, even if we weren't commissioned to. I think once you know, and you have that responsibility to try and advocate for the best. We're trying to understand the concerns around doing something different. MVHR wasn't lightly accepted by the client group on these projects that we're working on for City of Edinburgh Council. We really had to demonstrate through the energy modelling kind of the benefit of doing it. And if you don't do it to meet EPC band B on these buildings, particularly because they're so constrained, you just couldn't get there. And some of the flats might not get there either, which is where you have it's within the limits of costs and, other constraints and technology. But you're right. I think EPC is a blunt tool. The policy is really good intentions, but it is a bit each 2 is under review, and it is probably going to move and change to a more metrics-based system, which does look at, say, space heating demand or an overall energy usage, which is where the PHPP and other methodologies come into their own, essentially. But I think for us, the process is about giving the client enough information to try and make their own informed decisions. We're not going to push anything on anybody, but what we will do is we'll give you the information so that you can hopefully try and make the best decision that you can as a client. And ultimately, if someone says we don't want MVHR, we won't do it. We won't force it through because it's not our money, it's not our building, it's not our project. But all we'll do is advocate for the best.
Okay. And in terms of that, I suppose there are obviously there are other architectural practices available, and some are working in Edinburgh. And I know Stal and Brand are looking at some of the ones in Muirhouse. And do you look at actually what they're carrying out there and make comparisons, or?
Yeah, so we the design teams that are working on these retrofits for City of Edinburgh Council, we have been having regular lessons learned sharing sessions, which focus on particular themes. So we've had some on fire and fire safety. We've had some on structure, energy, and servicing. So we are speaking as a set of design teams across the board with the council present. So it's about trying to find the best approach. But I think what the council and the client are very good at acknowledging is that every set of their buildings are unique, and there's not going to be a one-hit approach that's going to be right for every project, and they are looking at each one uniquely. And I'm not sure the energy modelling method on Oxcars and Schmickery, but it'll be interesting to kind of see, and whatever they do will hopefully have a positive impact and change. But that's where the post-occupancy evaluation comes in, to start to try and kind of evidence and justify some of the decision making.
Yeah, I grew up next door to Inchmickery, so I'm interested in what happens with Inchmickery. I'm pleased that it's been kept because I'm familiar with it, not for any historical value, but just because I saw it every day for a long time. So I'll be very interested to see how that kind of, and they're looking at that sort of Lacatan Vassal kind of envelope kind of approach, which is quite interesting to kind of see that happening to one of the blocks in Edinburgh. And obviously that we won't go into controversies around how other places are doing it, but obviously a lot of local authorities are dealing with retrofit at scale. But we thought that today, because of the use of the place standard or your adaptation of it, it would be helpful to have that. I'm not seeing any more hands. We're at 2 minutes to 11. Heather has dropped some of Hess's research on cables wind into the chat so that people can have a look at that. And Carla, are you able to share a version of the home standard with us, and then we can circulate it, because we'll circulate your presentation with everyone afterwards. We can put it online. Do you want us to put it online, or do you want us not to put it online?
Let me check with others in the practice. I think we're more than happy to share it. But
Yeah.
what we do want to do is we kind of want to develop it. So if anybody has any feedback on what's included in it, or is interested in getting involved in that process, we'd be able to do that. But I think we do want to make it open source in the end, but we've just not had the time.
If you're happy for us to share it with email, then you can ping it to Emma. She'll ping it and
Yeah.
your contact details in it, so that if people want or are available to give feedback on it, then that would be great.
Yeah, that'd be great to get. But yeah, so we'll share it. But I'll just need to check out hosting it online, if that's okay for.
Which I would totally understand if you don't want us to do that. That's totally understandable. Okay, it's 11 o'clock. Normally we'd now start we'd have a break here, but today we're drawing it to a conclusion. So everyone go away, have your coffee. Carl, thank you very much for sharing the project you're seeing. You're getting appreciation in the chat there. It's really interesting to hear about it at this stage. And we'll look forward to maybe in 5 years' time coming back and seeing what it looks like post-occupancy as well. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us this morning. We hopefully will see you all again in 2 months' time at our next meeting of this. Details of that yet to be announced. And hope everyone has a good, warmer day than I'm having next to a drafty window.